what's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. My name is Lucas Wenzel, and today we are talking about 10 players that you should be looking to stash ahead of this weekend's slate and ahead of next week's waivers as well. But before we dive into that list, want a chance at winning a signed DK Metcalf Seattle Seahawks jersey courtesy of Pristine Auction, the premier autographed sports memorabilia auction house? You need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now, comment below on this video, and that's it. We will be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can know when new videos are up and to claim your prize. Didn't win? You can still sign up at pristineauction.com using the link in our video description, and if you use the registration code FantasyPros, you'll get $10 off your first order. Kicking off our list this week is Washington Commanders wide receiver Curtis Samuel, who's rostered in 36% of leagues. Now, I fully realize I'm starting with a player who is on bye in week 14, but if you have an extra roster spot, Curtis Samuel is absolutely worth the ad. He's gone for at least 65 yards in each of his last 2 games en route to 2 top 25 finishes at the position. Against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, he drew a whopping 12 targets, caught 9 of them for 100 yards even. The Commanders don't get the juiciest of matchups for Curtis Samuel down the stretch, but with an injury to Brian Robinson in the backfield, the Commanders will likely stick to what their game plan has been all year. Throw until they can't throw anymore with Sam Howell. If you are in need of wide receiver depth before the fantasy playoffs, Curtis Samuel is a great stash. Next on our list is Minnesota Vikings running back Ty Chandler, who's rostered in 23% of leagues. The Vikings are coming fresh off their bye in week 13, and Ty Chandler is coming off his best performance of his career in week 12 against the Broncos. On only 31% of the snaps, he rumbled for 73 yards on 10 carries and caught all 4 of his targets for 37 yards. Up to this point, Alexander Mattison has maintained the undying loyalty of Kevin O'Connell ahead of Ty Chandler, mostly because of his superiority in pass protection. But Ty Chandler has been improving each week. This is typically the time we see things turn for the better for these young players like Chandler, and he gets 3 good matchups to prove it in his next 4 games. The Vikings play the Raiders this week, the Bengals in week 15, and the Packers in week 17, who have all struggled against running backs this year. Coming in next in back-to-back weeks is Jaylen Hayes, wide receiver for the New York Giants, who's rostered in 6% of leagues. We saw a potential glimpse of the Jaylen Hayes breakout in week 12 as he put up a career-high 109 receiving yards on 5 receptions. In week 12, Hayes was 5th amongst all wide receivers in yards per route run, he was 6th in average depth of target, and he even boasted the highest PFF receiving grade on the week. Look, I'm not telling you it's going to be pretty in this lackluster situation with Tommy DeVito, but considering he ran a route on 23 of DeVito's 33 dropbacks in week 12, there's still plenty of upside here, and Hayes is a big play waiting to happen. Now that the Giants are off their week 13 bye, similar to Ty Chandler, we could start to see the tide turn for the better for Jaylen Hayes. Up next is Dallas Cowboys running back Rico Gathers, who's rostered in 10% of leagues. You're going to notice a trend with running backs in today's video. Handcuff running backs are extremely valuable at this point of the fantasy football season. If you had championship aspirations with Jonathan Taylor or Ramondre Stevenson, or even both on your roster, your hopes may be shot if you didn't have Zach Moss or Ezekiel Elliott stashed. We want to keep your championship hopes alive, so that's why we're going to stash Rico Gathers as Tony Pollard's handcuff, even if you aren't a Tony Pollard manager. There's really not any standalone value with Rico Gathers, but if something were to happen to Tony Pollard, there is no doubt Rico Gathers would be the #1 waiver wire ad in the following week. The next player to stash is wide receiver Joshua Palmer of the Los Angeles Chargers, who's rostered in 30% of leagues. Palmer had his 21-day practice window opened earlier this week as he's coming off IR with a knee injury. This is fairly good news considering Jalen Guyton hasn't been able to step up in his absence, and Quentin Johnson continues to struggle with drop issues. In weeks 3 through 7 prior to his injury, Palmer was 17th in yards per route run and 8th in average depth of target of all wide receivers. The caveat here is that Palmer may not work his way back into fantasy relevance until week 16 or 17, but every bit of potential advantage matters in the fantasy playoffs. And Palmer is a wide receiver you could potentially be flexing in deep leagues come playoff time. We're going to talk about another defense and special team stash this week, and this week's spotlight is on the New Orleans Saints. Like I mentioned with Josh Palmer, every bit of potential advantage matters in the fantasy playoffs, and the Saints get two great matchups in the next 2 weeks. They play the Bryce Young-led Carolina Panthers at home this week, and to follow it up, they get the Tommy DeVito-led New York Giants in Week 15 at home. After that, they get the Rams and Bucks, who have ability to score, but in the next 2 weeks, the Saints have two of the most desirable matchups, and they could help push your team even closer to that fantasy championship. Our next player is Buffalo Bills wide receiver Khalil Shakir, who's rostered in 13% of leagues. Shakir is only 2 weeks removed from his best fantasy finish of his career, where he finished with 20.5 fantasy points on 115 receiving yards and a score. Sure, he's the fourth option in the Bills' passing attack most weeks behind Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, and Dalton Kincaid, but there's some reason for optimism here in his upcoming matchups. Not only could they be high scoring, leading to more passing, but the Chiefs have allowed the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers in the slot since the start of November, and the Chargers have allowed the 9th most in that same stretch. As I've mentioned all video, depth matters at this point in the season, and Shakir could be a phenomenal end-of-bench stash that boasts surprising upside. Another player making his second straight appearance on this list is D'Ernest Johnson, running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's rostered in 11% of leagues. 4 straight weeks now, D'Ernest Johnson has outsnapped Tank Bigsby as the backup to Travis Etienne. Prior to last week, Johnson had also reeled in at least 28 receiving yards for 3 straight weeks. As I mentioned with Rico Gathers, having your handcuffs locked in place at this point of the season is crucial. If something were to happen to Travis Etienne, your championship hopes would vanish entirely if you didn't, at the bare minimum, have D'Ernest Johnson stashed on your bench. It's not a fun stash, certainly not a flashy stash, but it's a necessary one ahead of the fantasy playoffs. We're going to go deep down into the stashes for this next player, Dontavian Wicks, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, who's rostered in only 2% of leagues. As of this recording, Christian Watson is dealing with another hamstring injury, and it's unclear whether or not he'll be able to go for Week 14. Instantly, you think of Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed stepping up in his absence. But there's some super sneaky potential with Dontavian Wicks. Wicks has seen 4+ targets in 5 straight games and has seen at least 14 yards per catch in 5 of his last 6. Since Week 8, he's also running 2.4 yards per route according to PFF, which is 13th best of all wide receivers. In a deep league, or even a deep dynasty league, where Wicks could be floating around, it may be worth the stash, especially if Christian Watson misses extended time to close out the season. Wrapping out our list this week is San Francisco 49ers running back Elijah Mitchell, who's rostered in 17% of leagues. Mitchell has made this list before, and it hasn't been for standalone value. Christian McCaffrey dominates his backfield, we all know that. But Elijah Mitchell is a premier handcuff stash. If anything were to happen to CMC, Mitchell would inherit a massive role in this offense with a tremendous schedule and would immediately become a league winner and playoff hero. Those are the kind of players you cannot afford to miss out on, especially if you are a Christian McCaffrey manager. Alrighty, y'all, that is all I have for you today. Remember, want a chance at winning a signed DK Metcalf Seattle Seahawks jersey courtesy of Pristine Auction, the premier autograph sports memorabilia auction house? You need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now, comment below on this video, and that is it. That is all you need to do. We will be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can know when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. And hey, if you didn't win, you can still sign up at pristineauction.com using the link in our video description. And if you use the registration code FantasyPros, you'll get $10 off your first order.